It all started when Marcus found out that he had a serious degenerative disease. Little by little, his strength in his body would be consumed, so he was forced to choose between a distant and painful death or an early death without suffering. Jack was his friend, but also a doctor. He took care of Marcus at all times, trying to make his life as pleasant and comfortable as possible. Knowing his friend's intentions to stop suffering, he made a trip to the West Indies to study some native methods of healing. There, he learned certain practices quite far from modern medicine, prohibited articles on monstrous surgical experiments, animal transplants in humans, brain modification, and many more studies unauthorized by the medicine of his country. 4 months later, Jack returned from his trip. His friend was anxious to see him again. Marcus's health condition had deteriorated a lot, and he was admitted to a hospital. The doctor explained to his friend the plan he had for him. In his trip, he had found a substance that produced a deep sleep to the one who took it. A near-death state was achieved. Muscles relaxed completely, and even breathing and heartbeat ceased while the effects lasted. Jack assured him that he had seen the effects on several natives, and the results were amazing. Many had been cured of terminal illnesses, but for several days his body would remain so immobile that it would look like a corpse, becoming visible, a state of rigor mortis. At first, Marcus wasn't too clear about the procedure. He began to feel fear and nausea, but on the other hand, the hope of recovery convinced him to continue. There could be the possibility of being cured, something that all the doctors considered impossible. Jack's plan was to administer a copious amount of the substance and leave his body in a semi-dead state. During that time, the disease would stop attacking him, since his body would be almost completely stopped. And in a few days, the disease would be gone and his body would be resurrected. However, there was a problem. It couldn't be known that the doctor had administered said substance, nor could he hide a semi-corpse in the hospital. That substance was illegal in his country, and if anyone found out, the doctor could go to jail. So, they had to simulate his death. It was a macabre and risky idea, but also the only hope of getting his life back. So, he accepted his proposal. After inoculating a necessary amount of the substance, Marcus would be declared deceased from his illness. He had many symptoms, so a coroner was not called, and the death was not investigated. After his burial, Jack would secretly open his friend's grave and bring him home unharmed. Jack had some doubts. What if he woke up in the grave before his friend rescued him? Although he knew that his condition would not last much longer. The thought of suffocating to death in his own grave tormented him. Fortunately, before he knew it, he had already fallen into a state of semi-paralysis and was immediately seized by a deep, dark sleep. Everything went as Jack had planned, even the plan of the exhumation of the grave. So that there would be no mistakes, they decided to mark the coffin with a number, 333. That way, they would know at all times that it was Marcus's coffin. In the cemetery, he left everything as it was. No one would ever find out that a body was missing there. The undertaker was an old friend of the doctor. He helped him with everything and would never reveal his macabre secret. A week later, Marcus woke up at Jack's house. His body was still paralyzed. He could only move his head weakly. However, all his senses were alert. He couldn't believe it. The plan had worked and he didn't feel any pain. A few days later, he was able to eat solid food, indicating that his body was slowly recovering. Jack was very interested in discussing all of his daily symptoms, always asking him if he was feeling anything special. With each passing day, he was getting better, but he still felt the effects of the paralysis. It seemed that his body was anesthetized. It was a strange feeling, since he had stopped suffering, because he felt no pain, and his mind worked normally. However, his body was still asleep. It was as if he had become quadriplegic. The doctor explained that the first resuscitation process had been carried out, but he didn't know exactly when the paralysis of the body would end. Marcus was beginning to feel strange with his friend. It seemed to him that he had paid more attention to his reactions and stimuli than to his own healing. Sometimes he could see a strange gleam in his eyes as he examined him, a kind of victorious flash of having brought him to life after death. The man continued to wait each day with sorrow for the return of his bodily functions. The doctor assured him that it was not long, and that he would enjoy an existence that few men had experienced. The following days, Marcus noticed his friend more and more distant. He felt that he was treating him only as an experiment. He often told him about his new jobs with transplants and cruel treatment of animals in the laboratory that made him shudder. Marcus still hadn't been able to see his body in its entirety since he had woken up, but with his sense of touch returning, he discovered that it had various forms that were unfamiliar to him. He gradually regained mobility in his hands and arms. However, he found it very difficult to get his limbs to obey the orders of his brain. He was totally taken aback. His hands had become clumsy. He had to perform a movement several times to get it done correctly. One day, he asked his friend if he could help him get up and sit on the bed. He felt strong enough to try. His legs seemed to have regained some strength, and he wanted to see how far he could go. At first, the doctor objected, but finally agreed. He advised him to cover himself well with the sheets so as not to be cold, which surprised Marcus. The temperature in the room was nice, but maybe it had something to do with the rehab. The man slowly sat up in bed. At that moment, Jack's face lit up. But Marcus felt as if his arms and legs were refusing to obey his commands. It scared him to be condemned the rest of his days to an absence of sensations. Before, he felt terrible pain, but now he was unable to feel anything. At night, his dreams also haunted him. He would wake up screaming horribly from his nightmares. He dreamed of corpses, cemeteries, lost souls, and macabre events. And meanwhile, in another room, Jack continued with his experiments without flinching, which made him pissed off. After several days of thinking about it, he decided to carry out a plan. He wanted to get out of there. When night came in the gloom, he managed to sit up and put his feet on the ground. The vertigo made him fall onto the mattress instantly. After a few minutes, he tried to get to his feet again, holding on to the bed. The feeling of disobedience in his legs made it much more difficult for him to walk. But little by little, with a candlestick in hand, he managed to reach the corridor of the house. He was heading for the exit, but as he passed the door to his friend's lab, he couldn't help but be curious about what was there. When he entered, what he saw terrified him. Animals, fetuses, bottles with liquids. It seemed to be inside a horror movie. In one corner, Jack was sleeping with his head on his desk and a bottle of alcohol clutched in his hand. For a time, Marcus stood motionless before the scene, afraid that Jack would wake up, but then taking a step forward, he hit his head with the candlestick. The crack was followed by a jet of blood that fell from the table to the floor. But Marcus felt no remorse for killing his friend. He looked at all the specimens that were scattered around the room in various states of preservation. Jack had shown no mercy to them. He had gone too far in his experiments to deserve to continue living. And Marcus considered it his duty to do justice. He left the lab and staggered to the stairs that led down to the front door. He stumbled downstairs and reached the ground floor. He was still having a hard time keeping himself steady, so he grabbed an umbrella at the entrance and used it as a cane. He left the house and went to the cemetery where he had been buried. He approached his own grave, and he had a strange feeling. He began to scratch at the damp earth until his fingers tripped over the coffin. His fingers were bloody, but he felt no pain. The casket had the number 333 embossed on it. He tried to open the lid when a foul smell made him back down. Was there another dead man buried in his grave? Suddenly, the putrid smell became a familiar smell, horribly familiar. What had he become? He took off his pajamas, first his shirt and then his pants. He found himself with very hairy arms, too hairy to be human, and horrible legs, short and totally unknown to him. He had the body of a true monster. Jack had used him to accomplish his purposes. His body overturned any natural law of the human body. Marcus wanted to disappear. He didn't want to live that way. He understood why his friend always warned him to cover himself with the blankets, and he also understood why his body didn't obey him. Jack had treated him like another experiment. He was the result that artificial life could be possible. It had become his work of art. He grabbed the lid of the coffin again and opened it. He could see his own headless body was intact.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more Draw My Life videos, subscribe to our channel. See you on the next episode.